Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and this is like I've done this before, but another video on sort of like how to use Git and GitHub to do sort of like a group, or how do you work with other developers? So what are the patterns that you use? How do you use Git to do so? Okay. Now again, GitHub is only one of many different websites where you can use to share Git repositories. So a Git is a software for tracking the versions of files, and each group of files that you track, okay, is called a repository. And then there are websites like GitHub that allow you to share repositories out in the internet. But other popular websites for this are Bitbucket and GitLab. So literally everything I'm going to teach you in this video would apply to them as well, just so you're aware that you have choices on how to do this. It's not like GitHub's exclusive. Each of them does have slightly different features, but the general thrust of what I'll talk about in this video is the same for all three. Okay, so let's pretend that I have some sort of like development project. So I'm just going to stick to a plain HTML thing. Okay, keep it real simple and show you just like how I would set this up. So generally here, like a group project could end up having many repos, because you might have a separate backend app, a separate front-end app. You might have multiple backends, multiple front ends. So generally, you might have more than one repo. So generally, I'd start off with just a folder for the project as a whole that is not a repo. So if I open up the terminal, okay, so see I'm in this group project folder, so you can see it's called group project. This folder is not a repository. How do I know that this is not a repository? Well, I always just like to do a git status. Git status is going to give me back some feedback. It'll tell me what the status of the repository is if it is a repository, or it's going to give me an error if it is not a repository, which is what I'd like to see. So I see fatal, not a Git repository. Good. I have confirmed that the folder that my terminal is in, group project, is not a Git repository. And again, I can always check, hey, what folder am I in, by doing a pwd, print working directory. Okay, ta-da. Okay, wonderful. So what I would do here is make a folder for each project that the group is going to do. Now again, you don't necessarily have to make a folder, because sometimes you might be doing something like a React app, where using something like create React app generates the folder for you. So understand what you're doing, in the sense that, like, hey, if I'm creating like a Express app from scratch, I'm going to create a folder, do npm init, do all these things. Versus if I'm creating like a React app or a Svelte app or a Vue app, I'm running the generator, and the generator is going to generate a folder for me, so that is my project folder. I don't necessarily need to create another folder and then generate the project. Because then what happens is that you really want, especially for like JavaScript projects, you're going to want that package.json file at the top. And that's just going to go for pretty much any language. Every language generally has like that file that tracks dependencies. And you generally want that at the top, because most of these sort of automated deployment services look for that file. So they look for the gem file if it's Ruby. They look for the requirements.txt if it's Python. They look for the pom.xml if it's Java. They look for the cargo.toml if it's Rust. And that's how it knows, oh, you created something in this language. Okay, I know how to set this up. But if it looks at your repo, and your project is a folder inside of a folder, then what's going to happen is it's not going to know how to deploy your project. So point is, the repo should always be where that file is. That's where you should initialize the repo. Okay, so I'm going to create a folder. We're going to just call it, repo1, meaning it's like the first repo of the project. I mean, again, you could call it like front end, back end. You might call it like auth API. Like if you have a much more complicated app with a bunch of microservices, it might be like, hey, auth API, dog service. Each one will have like a specific name for what that particular application does in the bigger project. Okay, because again, in the microservice world, you might have like 10 backend APIs and 5 front-end UIs that use those 10 APIs. Projects can be like lots and lots of different applications to provide one sort of unified user experience. Okay, so I want to create a folder. That's not a folder. So let's see here. Create a folder. We're going to call it repo1. Fine. Okay. Now in this case, what I like to do, because I like to always avoid this issue of like, hey, is my terminal in the right folder? Okay, a good way to avoid that is, hey, I'm going to go reopen my VS Code in the right folder. So then I'm going to go back into my group project folder, go back, open up the repo1 folder, so that way I know I'm operating out of that particular project and just focus on that leg of my project, that particular app inside of all the apps that makes up this project. Okay, again, I can't state that enough. If you just try to work out of the parent folder with all the subfolders, it gets a lot more complicated. VS Code is not able to help you as much, and you're more likely to create files in the wrong place, to run terminal commands in the wrong place. So make sure that your VS Code is open up to the folder for what you are working on, and don't be afraid to reopen folders as you create subfolders if you're creating like sub-projects or something. Like don't just operate out of some high-level folder. You're going to run into constant issues. Okay, telling you that from experience. Okay, so here I am. We're going to keep this project really simple. I'm going to create like a wait, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, what I want to do is create a new file. This is going to be an index.html because again, the way your static web servers work is they always assume that index.html is the main page. So that's where I start. Okay, and it's just going to say hello world. Okay, so there's my project. It's just an h1 in an HTML file. That's it. Okay. Because again, the point here isn't the coding aspect. The point here is the Git and the GitHub. So then I would open up my terminal. So I generally would set up any boilerplate for my project. So let's say I were setting up like a backend project. I would try and like kind of set up the boilerplate for like the database connection, maybe the one route, just so I know that I can, or a route that can just so I know the database connection is working when I deploy it. Just enough so I can deploy it and know that those basic foundational pieces are working. If it's a React app, I would probably just deploy the default React app. Okay, if I'm using router, maybe I set up router first, so that way that's just set up. Because again, at the end of the day, if it's something that's just sort of like a global setup, set it up before you pass it to the rest of the group, so that way everyone doesn't have to re-implement it or wait for someone to implement some later step. Okay, so like setting up router, setting up your database connection for like a backend app, these kind of things is like get those out of the way initially before you really have everyone in your group make a copy of the project. Okay, but essentially once you set up all your boilerplate, in this case it's just going to be an H1, I'm going to head into my terminal. I have two options. Again, I could use VS Code. I have a separate video on like how to use like the VS Code Git features. Okay, that's clicking right over here, and then you have, see here it knows there's no repository. That's the beauty again of having the right folder open. So I know that this folder, which I do want to be a repository, isn't, so I could initialize it through VS Code. I'm going to do it through terminal because that's going to be the thing that you always have no matter what tool you're using. Because you may not be using VS Code. You may be working on a internet server that has no physical UI, but I'll always have terminal. Terminal will always be there to help me. So I can always do git init. That's going to initialize a Git repo because any Linux computer is going to have Git already installed. Macs are going to have Linux already installed. Windows, they'll have to install it by installing like git bash. Okay, but I'll do git init, and see I get this whole deal that hey, I initialized a Git repository. It's inside this, and it tells you this is the folder where the Git repository was created. Because again, the way Git tracks things is that it creates this folder, this hidden folder called .git, inside that root, the root of your repository, and that's where all the commits are being stored. Okay, so I know that's there. Like if I were to do a ls to list all my folders, and I were to do a -a, so it lists all folders, even the hidden ones, I'll see, hey, look, there's a .git folder in here. Okay, that's where all my commits are being stored. That's technically the repo. Okay, that's how I know I'm in the root of the repo, that this folder is where the repo starts, because that's where the .git is. Okay, if you're wondering, hey, like I have this repo inside of a repo, how do I know where one repo begins and one repo starts? It's where these .git folders are located. Okay, so I've created a repository, and then by default you're going to start on a branch. So if I can always check what branch I'm on by doing git branch. Okay, and right now that didn't really give you much. Why didn't it give me anything? Git branch. Oh, because I have no commits. So there's no commits. There's going to be nothing to show. So, but if I do git status, I can see, hey, what files am I tracking? So I can see right now that in my repository in this folder, there's only a file called index.html. It has not been staged for committing. So first thing I would want to do is, usually I'll just add all files because generally I'm going to want everything in there. So I'll just do a git add dot. That's going to add all the files. And if I do git status again, I'll see that, hey, look, index.html now is staged. Meaning, imagine like a photographer, like a commits like a photograph of your project. So I imagine like you're in that room with the photographer, and there's people who are in front of the camera and those people who are not in front of the camera. The people who are in front of the camera are the staged files ready to be photographed. Okay, so basically doing get at all is like telling the whole family, like, hey, everybody get in on this photo. Okay, so that's essentially what I'm doing. Okay, good. Now I would want to commit those files. -m, we'll just say first commit. Okay, you always want to make sure you put this -m flag, and then put like this text here, because what that does is that every commit has to get a message. So if you don't include a message here in line, meaning in the command, then here's what happens. Okay, if I just do git commit, see what it did, it just opened up Nano. On Macs, it's going to open up Vim. And if you're not familiar with Vim and Nano, you're not going to know how to edit it. All it's really asking me to do is just type in a commit message. So it's just saying, hey, type in a message. So I would just type in, hey, like my first commit. And then I would exit Nano by, and again, you would have to know this. I would do Control X to say, hey, I want to exit, then type in Y, yes, save the file, and then hit enter. And then it saves the file. But again, you can avoid all of that by making sure you have that -m and the quotation marks, so that way you just avoid all that. Okay, nice, simple commit messages that describe what you did. Good. Let's see, now I have a commit. So now, and the idea again, later on when we push our code online, you're not pushing the code. What you're pushing is commits. So you're pushing the photographs. So if you don't have commits, you're not going to be able to. You're going to get an error when you push online. I now do have a commit. So now when I do git branch, I see I have a main branch now. Why? Because there's a commit. There's a branch with a commit. My default branch is main. Okay. In your system, you might have a default. If you generally have like a plain vanilla like Linux installed, chances are your default branch is master. Okay, that can be changed. You can just Google how to change it. Like, how do I change my default branch on Git? I'm not going to worry about that now. Just know that you're always going to have a default branch. It's generally going to be main or master. Okay. So my default branch is main, and that's where I am currently. Okay. Now, generally for a development project, you're generally going to want 2 branches. You're going to want a main branch. That's essentially, imagine like that's like your xyz.com. That's your application. That's the website that all your users log into and use. Okay. That's not going to get updated as frequently because you're not going to update your production app, the thing that users see, every time you make the tiniest little change. So generally what you're going to do is you're going to create another sort of chain of snapshots that is based on, smaller changes that only your internal team's going to see. That's going to be called the dev branch. So to create a branch, I just do git checkout -b dev. Okay, git checkout -b dev. -b just means, hey, if this branch doesn't exist, create it. Okay, so I just do git checkout -b dev, and what it does, it creates another branch that's a copy of the branch that I was just on. So I was on main. And I can see in my prompt that, hey, look, it switched to dev. And if you're wondering why my prompt shows all this information, I have a piece of software called starship.rs that I've installed, works for all operating systems, that just allows my terminal to give me more information. So I can see like, hey, I currently have AWS configured to US East 1. I can see that this current Git repo is in the dev branch. Although you don't necessarily need that because VS Code will tell you too. See, right down here, you'll see that VS Code is telling you exactly what branch you're currently configured to. Okay, so I can see that right now. Any work that I'm doing is currently in the dev branch. Cool. So to recap, I've created a repository, I've made an initial commit, and I got my 2 branches. So I could go create a repo. So I'll head over to github.com. So again, I'm on github.com. I create a new repository. I want to keep it blank because I'm going to just do everything through terminal. So I'm going to just give it a name. We'll just call it like example group project. Okay. I'm going to keep it public. No, don't add a README. We can do that, locally. Again, because if you add anything, what happens is that gets treated as an initial commit, and then you're gonna have that means there's already gonna be a first commit in this new repo on GitHub. You created a new commit locally already. We just created a commit, and that's going to create a conflict, being like, hey, we have 2 first commits. This doesn't make sense. So just leave all that blank. I'm going to create a repository. And see, now I have this empty repository. Now, it's going to give you, this URL is the URL of this remote repo. So I want to send my commits to this remote repository so that way they both match. Notice that there's 2 versions of this URL. Okay, there's HTTPS and SSH. if you've set up SSH. And if you've set up SSH, you would know you did. It's not something you accidentally did. Okay, you did that. And I have videos on that if you want to look up how to set up SSH with GitHub. But I'm not going to go over that in this video. If not, just use the HTTPS URL. If you don't know, it's always safe to use the HTTPS URL. That one will always work. It's just going to ask you for your username and login and password every time you do something. Okay, which can be kind of annoying. If you have SSH, it won't bother you because you set up this, you gave it this file that kind of allows it to verify your computer, so you don't have to worry about username and passwords every time you do every little thing. I have SSH set up, so I'm going to use this SSH URL. So I'm going to head over here, and I need to connect my local repository to that remote repository I just created on github.com or Bitbucket or GitLab or whatever. Okay, I could do it through the terminal, and I could also do it through VS Code. In VS Code, I would just click over here to remotes, and then I can just click plus to add one. It'll ask me for the name. It'll ask you to give it a name, and it'll ask you to, hey, what's the URL? Okay, I'm going to do it in terminal. So to do it in terminal would be git remote add. So I'm adding a remote. The idea is I'm adding a connection to a repository, another repository outside of my computer, or just outside of this repository, and you have to give it a name. Usually, like what you call that repository that everyone's working off of, like the main original source, is origin. Okay, you could call it whatever you want. Okay, you can call it cheese. It doesn't matter what you call it. But again, later on when I want to push, that's the name I got to use. And then you say, hey, I'm adding this origin remote. What's its name, or what's its URL? I then paste the URL. Okay, so then the URL comes after the name origin. I'm going to hit enter, and see now that origin's been added. Okay, and if I wonder, hey, what remotes do I have, and what are they connected to? I can always do git remote-v. This command is going to list any remotes that I have and show me the URL they're connected to. Okay, so I can see, hey, origin is currently pointing to this URL. Because sometimes you might have added the wrong URL, or you forget what the name of your remote is. You can always just use this command, git remote v, and you can be like, oh, okay, that's where I'm at. So now what I want to do is push up both of my branches. So if I'm going to do a git push, that's going to be push up my commits. But the question is, I might have like many repositories. Sometimes you might create multiple repositories in multiple places, like on Bitbucket, on GitLab, so you have multiple copies and redundancies. So I want to make sure I'm pushing to the right spot. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do git push origin. It's the only remote I have, as we can see here. It's the only remote that I have connected currently. Origin, but I want to push up the main branch. And now when I specify main, it's not even though I'm on the dev branch currently, it's going to push up the code on my main branch to the main branch online. Okay, so I do that. That's going to push up the main branch, and then I want to push up my dev branch. So I do git push origin dev. Okay. And then that's going to push it up to the whatnot. So now if I go back over here and I refresh, I can see that now, look, my project's been updated. And if I click here, I have a main branch and a dev branch. Okay, so I got main and dev. Okay. Cool. Okay, so both of those branches have been uploaded and they're all set up. Now, next what I want to do is just set up some deployments, because that way everyone can see like what the status of stuff is. I can use Netlify, Vercel, Render. The way you deploy them is going to be the same for all of them. Okay, you just connect the repo. Okay. So I can go to Netlify. I'm just going to click, hey, I want to add a new site. So import an existing project. I can choose, hey, look, hey, where am I getting the repo from? I'm going to do it from GitHub. And I want to choose group. Let that search. The cool thing is like especially Netlify has like lots of good, and I think most of them have features for you to be able to do multiple deployments within one project, so you don't have to necessarily set up multiple projects if you don't want. We'll show you, like, see right now I'm going to deploy my main branch. So you see I can choose between which branch I want to deploy. I'm going to deploy the main branch. If I was using React, there'd be some stuff I had to put in here. Usually it detects it automatically, but since this is just an HTML page, it's just going to work. And then I'm going to hit deploy site. Okay, and it should pretty much be up right away because there's no building. It's just an HTML file. See, and there it's up. And if I click on here, hello world. There it is. Okay. Now, what I could do is I could go back to like my team and then do another deployment for my dev website. Now, usually what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change this to like, I'm going to go to the domain settings, and I'm just going to give this a better name. So I'll just click over here and click options, edit site name. And we would call this like, group project 011523, for the date. Just because, for you it might be like, cheesemasters.com or something. Okay, if you wanted to add like a specific domain, you can click here to add custom domain and follow the steps. But yeah, so there's my group project, and if I click on it, there it is. Great. So there's my main deployment. I could go make another deployment. Now I'm pretty sure here in Netlify you do have an option of creating like branch deployments. Let me see here. Build and deploy, build settings, branches. Okay, here we go. So I can hit edit settings here, and I can say let me add individual branches, and then I can actually add a deployment of the dev branch. Okay, and then that should create. Now let me just remember how you access the branch deployment. So production branch, branch deploy. Okay, so then basically it becomes a site name, but then you add this in front of it with the branch name. So now instead of me having to create two separate deployments, I could just use this. And if I want to see what the dev branch looks like, I'll just click on the main website. And I can just go over here and add like dev dash dash. And then that'll, since I selected the dev branch to be deployed, I can just go in here and see, well, right now I didn't do that. So let's see here. Is this your site you were expecting before? Okay, maybe I didn't set that up right. Again, worst comes to worst, you could just set up the two deployments. I was just trying to be fancy. Let me just make sure that I set that up right. Branch deploys. Control which branches in your Git repository you want to deploy. Edit settings. Deploy all the branches pushed to the repository. Don't do that because you might end up having like hundreds of branches. That'd be crazy. Save. So what I'm going to do is go back to the deploys, and I'm going to trigger a manual deploy because maybe it needs to redeploy again to deploy both branches. Okay, so that's live. So now let's go to the project. So go to the deploys here. Click on the project. Now let me try that again with dev. No. Okay. Well, again, worst comes to worst, you just create another deployment. I would just go to, go to AlexMerced's team and click add a new site, then just redeploy the same site just from a different branch. Okay, but let me just try one more time. Okay, just like reading through this, what I think is going to happen is that we're not going to see that dev deployment if we're using like the branch deploys until I do the next push to dev. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do that real quick. So let's see here. I'm going to just make a quick change to dev. So I'm going to say hello world cheese. Okay, so I've created a change. So I can see like now this file has been changed. So if I do it, and again, right now I'm still currently on the dev branch. So if I do git status, okay, I can do a git add all to make sure I add that to staging. Then do a git commit -m for my commit message. Then say cheese as a commit message. Make a commit. And then do a git push origin dev to push up this commit to the dev branch. Okay, cool. And again, just to show you that like the two branches are different, if I do git checkout, I can change branches. So I can do git checkout main. Now look over here. Like watch what happens when I switch to main. I do git checkout main. Boop. See, it becomes hello world again because the main branch doesn't have the commit I made while I was on dev. And if I go back to dev, git checkout dev, the code changes. And again, I think you could also change branches by just clicking over here too. So yeah, so you see you can change branches, and you can also, grab your remote branches. So VS Code can help you in a lot of ways. And you can create like, there's a little, point is it can help you. And also you can do it from here. You can go over here and say, hey, I want to create a branch. And be like, I want to create a branch and do all sorts of stuff. See all your branches and, switch to another branch, compare with working tree, add to favorites. There's all sorts of options you have. Okay, but I'm going to head back over here. Let's try to see if did that dev deployment happen. Like, let's just see if that branch deployment thing is working. So that'd just make it easier instead of having to deploy the whole thing twice. Dev dash dash. And there it works. Okay, so see, every time I push a deployment to the dev branch, I can then see, hey, look, the dev branch I can see the changes on the dev branch by just typing in that dev right there before. So that's a nice thing. I think that you probably find a similar feature on Vercel if you look through the settings, and probably on render. Usually, in the past, I've always just deployed it multiple times. Either way is fine. It's not a huge difference. But this way, you only have to create one project on Netlify to handle those multiple deployments. And it would, I think, again, if you're using render for a backend deployment, render.com, they might have something similar feature for that as well. Again, I haven't tried that. So you might still have to deploy it multiple times depending on if it's a backend app where you'd have to use a different service. Because Netlify, you're not deploying like a backend Express app. It doesn't handle that. It's not built for that. Okay, cool. So we have the project deployed. So now, again, let's pretend now I'm one of the team members. So now that this thing is like all set up, okay, what's going to happen is that person who set everything up is going to go over here, click on Settings, okay, click on Collaborators. Okay, it's asking me to verify, so let me go grab my phone. Okay, yay for multi-factor authentication. So, you know, again, it's always good to have multi-factor authentication on, so that way you can not get hacked, which is always nice. Okay, so I don't have any collaborators yet, so I would like add people, and I would just say, hey, you know, add their username or their email, and you add them to the repo. They would then log into their GitHub account, accept that you invited them, and then they'd be added. They'd be able to edit this repo based on the permissions you give them. Okay, and there's a lot of things you can do here. Never bad to explore all the different things you can do within the repo. Okay, but let's pretend like I'm someone who is working on this project. Okay, so what I would do is that you would first add me as a collaborator, and then you'd give me the URL. I would then go, hey, you know, go grab this SSH URL to clone the project. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to head back to that parent folder. Okay, so I'm back in this group project folder because again, I'm creating my own copy of the repo because now I'm somebody else. Before I was like Steve, now I'm John. Okay, so if I'm that other user, I'm that other member of the team. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to wherever I'm going to work on my project, then I'm going to do a git clone and paste the URL. Okay, and then that's going to create, you know, a folder with the name of that's named after the repo. Okay, so you don't have to create a folder. The folder is going to get created when you do the git clone, and then that folder is a repo. So the minute I cd inside of there, watch, if I cd inside of example here, example group project, see, it's already a repo. Okay, see, my thing detected it and is able to kind of figure out what's going on there. So, but again, after I cloned it, what's a smart thing to do? I'm going to go reopen my VS Code, so that way I can work strictly outside of that folder. So that way I'm only working on the folder for the project, the specific leg of the project that I'm working on. This way my terminal is always kind of in the right place. Okay, these little steps are going to make your life a lot easier. Because you see now I'm on the main branch for this repo. Now again, I don't want to work on the main branch because if I'm doing work, I want to be in the dev branch. Okay, but if I do git branch, I only have main branch. But it's like, wait a second, doesn't the remote repo have main and dev? Okay, well what you want to do is that it only initially clones the main branch. What you want to do is, well, first we'll probably maybe just run git fetch just in case. So what git fetch does is going to communicate with that origin repo, because when you clone it, like if I do git remote -v, you can see origin is already that repository. Like, how does it know? Since I cloned that repository, it knows that repository is a remote, so it adds it off the bat. I didn't have to add it again. Okay, but it only clones down the main branch, or the branch that you cloned. So then what I want to do is go create a new branch that tracks the dev branch. And the way you do that is you do git checkout --track. So you're saying, hey, I'm creating a new branch that tracks this branch from my online version of the repo. And since the remote is called origin, that's that. And then the specific branch from origin that I want to track is dev. Okay, and see, now I have a new branch. If I do git branch, I have a main and dev branch, and I'm on the main branch. So if I click here on index.html, hello world cheese. And again, if I switch between main, git checkout main, hello world, git checkout dev. Okay, it's important that you do that track. Because if I just create a new dev branch, it's just going to create a new dev branch as a copy of main. what I want is to have a dev branch that matches the one that's online. Okay, so that's the command you would do to do that. Okay, and that way, sometimes it'll, if you could do git checkout dev, it'll figure that out. But I always like to make sure that you don't leave anything to chance. So just do the track command, and you'll be fine. Okay, so now I'm on the dev branch, and now let's say I have been assigned to do, add an H2. Like that's my ticket. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be on the dev branch, and I'm going to do git checkout -b, and since I'm adding code, okay, that's called a feature. So I'm adding functionality. So usually the branch name is going to be feature first, so that's the first part of the name, / again, something that represents what I'm building out. So I'm going to say /h2. Okay, so I do git checkout /b feature, and see now I'm on this branch. Okay, and if I do git branch, okay, feature h2. So then I'm going to make my change. So I'm going to just add an h2. Goodbye, everyone. Okay, good. I've made my change. I then will make my commit, git add dot git commit -m, h2 added. Okay, and now I want to push, but now look what I do when I push. I don't want to push my dev branch. I don't want to push my main branch. I want to push my feature h2 branch. So I'm going to do git push origin feature h2. Okay, assuming that I've tested it all out and everything's working the way that I like. Okay, so now when I go to the main repo and I refresh the page, see now there's 3 branches. Okay, so I can go now from here from GitHub, I can go like to any branch and take a look at what's there, examine things. If I want to take a look at the different commits, like if I go to feature h2, I can click here on commits, and I can see all the commits in that particular branch. Like how did the files end up there? And I can go take a look at each commit and say, hey, I want to take a look at what this commit looks like. Okay, and I can see, hey, in that commit, this line changed to this. Yay! Okay, so that way we can help understand what's going on. So again, so imagine like this is Facebook and I've added a new chat feature. So my branch is feature chat, and now what I want to do is actually add that to the next release. The code that's building up to the next release is going to be in this dev branch. So what I want to do is do a pull request. So you see here, like dev had recent pushes 9 minutes ago. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to pull request, this pull request section. And a pull request is essentially a merge. Okay, now I'm going to click new pull request. And I'm going to say, hey, I want to merge this into dev. That's my base. Like that's where the changes should go, but the changes are coming from feature h2. Okay, and let's just do a check to see, hey, now if you see this all green, then we're good shape. This kind of summarizes the changes, so you can see like, hey, this is what's going to change. And then I can click create pull request, and then just say create pull request. Okay, this doesn't actually make the pull request. Okay, so now it's ready to go. Generally at this point, you're going to want somebody else to look at it. Okay, so you want like somebody else to go, like, usually you'll have like a team leader. They'll go look at this. Probably what they're going to want to do is that they're going to be like, oh, okay, hey, we have this pull request, because they're going to go to this pull request page, and they're going to see, hey, look, there's your pull request. So if I'm the team lead, I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to see all this information. I'm going to click on like files changed, so that way I can kind of just see all the changes and just make sure that everything looks good. Okay, if there's anything that I kind of want to like leave a comment for, there's ways to leave a comment, or you can actually like edit the file if you need to edit anything that looks like it's going to break. Okay. Okay, you could also leave comments, so you can sit there and be like, okay, wait, this is not, there needs to be some fixes, and I can leave a comment here and just say, hey, can you fix this, this, and this, and this, and then they would re-update their branch, and then I would accept the pull request. Okay, so you don't have to accept it as is. Again, you can leave comments, and then they would go back, that team member would then go back and fix the things you put in the comment, and you can write the comment in Markdown, like right down here. But assuming everything looks good, I can click merge pull request, and then now that code is available in dev. So dev just gets updated, which means the dev deployment will get updated. So if I refresh this, goodbye everyone, see, dev just got updated. Even though, again, I wrote that code on a different branch, I push it up to GitHub, I made the pull request, it got reviewed, and then they accepted it. So then what's going to happen is that locally I'm going to get on my next ticket. So I'm going to check, go back to dev, But keep in mind, my local dev branch does not have those changes. So what I want to do is do a git pull origin dev, and now I'm going to pull back. See, I'm pulling down those changes. So that way my local dev branch should always be in sync with the dev branch remotely. Okay, so you have to kind of imagine the circle. It goes from like my feature branch up to the feature branch remotely, which then gets pulled into dev remotely, and then my local dev branch pulls from that remote dev branch. Okay, so essentially that's, and then basically at that point, because again, I want to make sure that my dev branch is updated before I make my next feature branch. So let's say now I get told that, hey, that shouldn't say goodbye everyone. It should say goodbye John. Oh no, there's a mistake. So I'm not adding a feature, I'm fixing something that's broken. Okay, so then I would just do like, I would create a new, oh no, don't change that. Okay. What I would do is then I would create a new branch, git checkout -b, except it would be called fix instead of feature, because this branch is not adding new functionality, it's fixing functionality that's not working right. So it'd be like fix h2. Okay, and then I would go there and I'm like, oh, I need to change this to fix John. I do that, then I'm going to go add my do my committing, git add dot, git commit -m, you know, right, fixed the h2, so that way it's obvious what that commit did. Okay, then I'm going to do push, git push origin fix /h2. Again, you always want to make sure you're using the right branch name. So now if I go back to GitHub, I go back to code, I can see that, hey, look, fix h2 has been added. So I'm going to go make a pull request. Okay, but I want to make sure that the pull request is going into dev. Okay, so the idea is that everyone's feature and fix branches should be merging into dev, and then dev, once it has all the new features and everything's like looking good, then that gets pulled into main. Okay, then you would do a separate pull request for main, because that's when you're updating it for the public. For last one, Facebook, so you see all the new features on Facebook or something. Okay, so in that case, again, we create the pull request, then we'd accept the pull request. Okay, there we go, merge pull request. But again, you shouldn't accept your own pull requests. Okay, you should create the pull request, and then again, whoever is in charge, your team lead, should then go over here to the pull requests and then, you know, check them out, make sure that they look good, leave any comments, that kind of thing. Okay, because you don't have to, if you have to make changes, all you have to do is update your branch. If you update the branch, the pull request automatically adjusts based on the current state of your branch, so you don't have to like remake the pull request. You just make the changes in your branch's code and then, you know, respond to the comment. Okay, so that's what the pull request section is here. Okay, let's say I'm going to go check out the dev branch and I notice that there's a problem. Okay, you may want to go to issues and then just file an issue. Okay, and be like, hey, I was using the app and I was testing the app and I noticed that this is broken. You file an issue, that way the team lead can be like, okay, these are the things that are broken, let me go assign that to someone on the team, and then that person will create a fixed branch, make a pull request, the whole deal. Okay, so that's essentially the workflow for how this should all go. Okay, so again, when people are testing the app and trying to like, hey, you know, this needs to be fixed, they can file an issue. And the idea is it gives visibility to the whole team to say, okay, hey, issues are the things that we need to get to and fix. And then pull requests are things that have been done that we may want to go check and then merge into the right branch. Okay, and then again with the deployment, again I can see right now, right, if I refresh this, okay, so you see like my dev branch is all up to date, but if I go back to the main branch website, that still is that. So then every once in a while we want to do like a product release, and that means we release the product to the public. I'd head over to pull request, create a new pull request from main, from dev. So basically main should only be receiving code from dev. And then we create that pull request. I can see all the changes. Okay, I can see these are all the commits that are going to get added that came in from other places. And then create a pull request and do that. That has been merged successfully. So now if I refresh this main deployment, so let me scroll over here, let's give it a second. 3, 2, 1. Then I refresh and see now that matches what was before. Because like, so again, Netlify is just going to Netlify, Vercel, Render. They're just going to update things as those underlying repos change. So again, it's just mattering make sure you have deployments that match up with the branches you want deployed. Don't deploy every branch. Okay, usually again you just need a production branch or production deployment. That's the thing that you have to think of as, hey, this is what the public sees. And then you need a development deployment, which is the deployment that only your developers should know what the URL is. And it's for that way so you guys can see, hey, as everyone's changes get merged in, we can kind of see how things are progressing, and test things out and file issues before the public sees it. Okay, so if you're not working on a ticket, go test out the website, see if there's a problem, and file an issue, so that way the team can continue improving upon the app. Okay, so hopefully this gives you an idea of like how to use like GitHub to do group work and how you would set this repo. And again, you might set up multiple repositories, but the idea is think about it as like one app, one repository. So hey, if you're doing microservice architecture where you have like an app just for like a tiny, just like a tiny, like let's say literally you have one app just for authentication and then a separate app for this and a separate app for that, each app should get its own repo. There are ways to do it as one big repo, aka a mono repo, but that gets really, really complicated and should only be done if a lot of your different projects are sharing the same dependencies. So if you have like 10 Express apps, okay, and you're sharing a lot of the same functions and files across those apps, okay, then it's worth using something like a turbo repo, and there's a couple other alternatives to create one big giant repo, but there's a lot more work in configuring all that and a lot more setup in doing it that way. So I would generally avoid that unless it's necessary. Okay, generally you're going to find it's going to be a lot easier to manage where it's just one app, one repo. Okay, but again, if you have an app with lots of apps, if you have your project with lots of applications that have a lot of overlap and shared dependencies, then exploring a mono repo makes sense. But like, hey, an Express app and a React app, they're not going to share any dependencies, so keep them in separate repos. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Hopefully you guys found this useful. If you did, make sure you leave a like, subscribe. I'll see you all later. Have a great day, and make sure you leave a comment as well. I'll see you all later. Have a great day and enjoy.